Well, welcome again, everybody. Always good to see you. Always good to see God's people show up to learn about God. We very much appreciate and respect that. And tonight, we're going to do a second part of, we covered a lot of things about the universe last week. We're going to get a little bit more detailed about that tonight, covering two specific arguments that the best explanation for the evidence I'm going to show you now is simply the Genesis account of creation. It's just the best explanation for it. It fits all the parameters that are necessary to explain these events, and certainly points to our God as the reason behind it all. So I want to start us off tonight with a quick devotional thought from Proverbs 23. In Proverbs 23, I'm going to be reading verses 17 and 18. Before I do, let's open in a word of prayer. Our Father and our God, we come to you through Christ our Lord, your Son. And Lord, we take great joy in just setting this time apart to study you. Lord, not that we would be smarter, Lord, but that we would be closer to you and more in love with you and wiser in the things of the world. And Lord, we pray that that would bear great fruit for your kingdom. So we pray that your Holy Spirit would just do what your Holy Spirit intends to do, that this would be a room filled with willing hearts, Lord, to submit to all that you have for us. We trust you, we love you, we submit to you in Jesus' holy and precious name. Amen. Proverbs 23, starting in 17, it says, "Do not let your heart envy sinners, but be zealous for the fear of the Lord all the day." So instead of looking at some of the worldly success that sinners have and the temporary passing pleasures of sin that come with that, it says don't envy that, but replace that type of vigor and that type of energy with a zeal for the fear of the Lord. So a zeal to revere God, a zeal to be obedient to God. And you get that zeal for obedience from understanding exactly who he is and exactly that he created you with intent and purpose, and those intents and purposes are fulfilled through obedience. So you actually get excited about obedience because it's like God left you the directions to fulfill the life that he intended for you, whatever those results would be. He left you the directions, and we're obedient to those directions. We see the fulfillment. So he says, don't let your heart envy sinners. That'll keep you away from that fulfillment. But be zealous for the fear of the Lord all the day. And then it says this for the reason. For surely there's a hereafter. It says you should be zealous for the Lord all day because surely there's a hereafter. This isn't all there is. A lot of times even Christians just focusing on the here that's here. The here that's here now. But it says there's a here that's there, that when you're there, the there will be here for you, right? But it comes after. So it's a hereafter that we got to focus in on. And because there's certainly a hereafter, then envying sinners not only is a massive waste of time, but it actually gets you off track for actually getting to that hereafter that's intended for you. And it says, if you keep in mind that surely there's a hereafter, it says your hope will not be cut off. So you live in the constant hope that all will be well, all will be made right, all will be filled with joy, all will be removed of sickness and death and trial and pain and crying and suffering. That's our hope. It's our hope that this existence is just a drop in the bucket of your total existence, and this existence is the test. It's the trial. Okay? And faithfulness is determined through this. And the more sincerely you know God, the more you will naturally trust God. And the more you naturally trust God, the less you'll envy the things of the world, and the more zealous you'll become for the fear of the Lord, in keeping in mind there's a hereafter. I love Hebrews 11 because it tells you how Moses and how Abraham and how the heroes of the faith actually did this very thing. It says Moses endured as seeing him who's invisible. It's as if he saw him. So now Moses has the opportunity to be a prince in Egypt. and enjoy all the treasures of Egypt as his own. He sees the suffering and afflictions of the people of God, and it says he considered those sufferings and afflictions with the people of God of greater riches than the treasures of Egypt. How do you get that type of mindset? Okay, it says, well, he did that as seeing him who's invisible. It's as if he was seeing God all the time. So when you face a temptation, Moses' way out of temptation was as if God were right there. It's very hard to sin if you picture God right there, correct? That'll straighten you out pretty quick. Okay? That's how Moses did it. It says Abraham did it. He wasn't considering the city he left where he was quite wealthy, and now he's traveling and living in tents. But it said he was focused in on the city, not that he came from with all his wealth, but the city whose builder and maker is God. Okay? He was looking to the new heavenly city, the new Jerusalem. So you keep your mind set on that city as if you're seeing God himself. And that'll take that envy of sinners away. And actually, you'll build a sympathy for sinners and a compassion for sinners that will lead to ministry for you. All right, so what we're learning tonight has to do with certainly there's a hereafter. If there's a hereafter, then who is the one who creates that hereafter and this present world? And what's the connection between this present world and that hereafter? So our claim, of course, is that a triune God created it. And if a triune God created it, then just like if somebody's building your house or building cabinets for you, or they're doing work in your home, you would anticipate that you could find their fingerprints for it, right? All over it. Well, this is finding the fingerprints of God on his creation. Okay, he left his fingerprints all over it. And so when we examine it, we see him through that. So we're going to start with the cosmological argument. Okay? Some of the points of the cosmological argument were stated last week, but let me give you a thorough teaching of this cosmological argument. So, as I mentioned last week, to form an argument, you need some premises. So these first two things that we see here, number 1 and 2, are the premises. And the way the arguments work is that you state these premises. Here's premise 1. Everything that had a beginning had a cause. But you can't just state that. You actually got to prove it. And the second premise is the universe had a beginning. So now, if we can prove the first two premises, that everything that had a beginning had a cause, and the universe had a beginning, then the conclusion will naturally follow, which the conclusion here is that the universe had a cause. If everything that had a beginning has a cause, the universe has a beginning, then the conclusion will be, therefore, the universe had a cause. Now, why is that something that we should want to prove? That the universe had a cause? Okay, well, we're going to cover that. So as we look at this first premise, everything that had a beginning had a cause, the question then becomes, is premise 1 true? Is it true that everything that had a beginning had a cause? Well, this is called the law of causality. It's actually a law of physics that we see comes true every time. All of science hangs on the law of causality. It's an undeniable law. And that law of causality simply says every effect has a cause for it. And the second part of it is that the effect cannot be greater than the cause. Okay? So whatever's causing the effects has to be greater than the effect. And if something is an effect, it certainly has to have a cause. Okay? Now, so that proves this first premise that we covered, that everything that has a beginning has a cause. It's an actual law of physics. It's always true. And people will say, well, then what caused God? And we're going to talk about that in a moment. Okay? Because remember that the premise says every effect has a cause. So all you have to do is identify that God is not an effect, right? We know this universe is an effect because we discovered it scientifically with the Big Bang that we're going to be talking about now. So now it's premise true. It's premise 2 true, that the universe had a beginning. So until the time of Einstein, most thought the universe was eternal. It's called the static state theory. And it was because of these understandings of the laws of cause and effect that they thought, what could possibly cause the universe? An atheist would think, what could possibly cause our universe? Nothing could cause our universe, therefore the universe would have to be eternal. But the discovery of the Big Bang, which is the scientific description of Genesis 1, would then say that now the universe has to have a beginning. We know that scientifically now. So then the question is asked, well, then what caused that beginning? Beginnings just don't begin with no beginners beginning them. Okay, so we need something to start the process. So what would qualify as a potential beginning of the universe, or a beginner of the universe? Well, we know that all time, space, and matter came into existence at the Big Bang. So therefore, the cause of the Big Bang has to be greater than the effect of the Big Bang. If the effect of the Big Bang is time, space, and matter, we need something that's outside of time. It has to be outside of time. It can't be limited by time. So now the necessary cause for the universe has to be an eternal cause. Has to be. Can't be limited by space, because there was no space before the Big Bang. So we need a cause that's not confounded by boundaries. We need something omnipresent. And matter. He can't be made of any of the matter of the universe whatsoever, because it was non-existent when the cause caused the Big Bang. So it has to be outside of time, space, and matter. So we have an Old Testament written about 4,000 years ago that gives this revelation of God that, without having any thoughts of a future Big Bang and scientific theory and physics and cosmology, actually gives a description of God who fits every check mark of what's necessary for the cause of the universe. He's omnipresent. He's not limited by space. He's eternal. He's not restricted by time. He's not made of matter. God is spirit. He fits all the necessary components. The cause of the universe also has to be an intelligent cause, because there's no scientific mechanism that will allow a non-intelligent thing to create intelligence. We never see intelligence coming out of non-intelligence. So now it's necessary that this cause has intelligence. Also has to have tremendous power, because he's starting with nothing and he creates everything from it. So we need an intelligent cause. We need a powerful cause. We need a cause not limited by time, space, or matter. And it would be awkward if the presentation of God in the Bible did not fit all of those scientifically necessary things. But he does. He fits them all. So I'm going to give you an acronym. And as you can see on the slide, no, you can't see it on the slide, can you? Now you can see on the slide the acronym spells the word surge. Okay? Surge. Okay. So now, because I teach high schoolers, I actually had the acronym spell urges, but I thought they deal with those enough. Let me not give them more. So I moved the S to the front, and we have surge. All right. A little cosmological humor. You're like very little cosmological humor, yeah. All right, now. So the S of surge stands for the second law of thermodynamics. And some of you are saying second starts with a 2. So what are you talking about? We're spelling it out. Okay, second law of thermodynamics is the S. All right, now, the second law of thermodynamics, we touched on it briefly last week, states that all systems are losing usable energy all the time. Okay, you're a system. You're losing usable energy all the time. That's why you eat, to replenish energy, right? That's why you sleep, to replenish energy, okay? The universe is losing usable energy all the time. It's going to burn itself out. Okay, so you'll hear atheist debaters like Christopher Hitchens, when he was alive, one of his great points that he would try to make about the non-existence of God is that what a crummy universe that it's losing its energy all the time. And then it's just going to die a tremendous heat death. Well, what's he ignoring in the Christian claim there? Christ is coming back, right? Okay. So second law of thermodynamics says that since systems are losing usable energy, if you imagine the universe losing its usable energy all the time, can it be infinitely old if it's losing usable energy all the time? If we're infinitely old and there was never a time that it wasn't losing usable energy, it would have run out of energy a long time ago. Okay? There's no way it could survive an infinite amount of days in the past of losing finite energy and still have it now. You got to remember, the claim is there's an infinite amount of days that the universe has been around losing this energy. Okay? It's like if you filled up your car with gas an infinite amount of days ago and been driving it ever since, you'd be out of gas by now. Okay? So therefore, the universe has to be finite. It has to have a beginning because we still have energy left over. So the second law of thermodynamics is probably more famously known as the law of entropy. It's the same law. Okay. So this law also states that nature brings things from a state of order to a state of disorder. The chair you're sitting in now is more reliable now than it will be in 50 years, correct? The molecules that make up that chair are going to break down and make it less reliable, correct? Things go from a state of order, and because it loses usable energy, it's going to go to disorder. All things go from order to disorder. Your cars break down. They don't get better and better over time. Okay? So now that we know there was a Big Bang, there was a Big Bang explosion. Explosions are like the textbook definition of chaos, right? They're the opposite of order. Yet from that chaos of the Big Bang explosion came all the tremendous order of our universe. Our universe is so ordered that when we study physics and metaphysics, we find that there's mathematical calculations that explain it all. So it's as ordered as math, and math is as ordered as it gets. So how did it go from this chaotic explosion to order when there's a law of the universe called entropy that says all things go from a state of order to disorder? So in other words, the universe is in the opposite condition of this law. It goes from disorder to order. You with me? Yeah. Okay. So therefore, what do we call a violation of natural law? It's a miracle, right? It's a miracle. So our universe is a miracle. The fact that it's here is a little violation of natural law. In fact, one of the most fundamental laws that cannot be violated in any form of science is the law of entropy. Okay? And our universe violated it just by being here. So therefore, the universe is a technical miracle, and miracles require miracle workers, because if there's not a miracle worker, it'll just follow the laws of the universe. You need a miracle worker to perform that miracle. All right, so Robert Jastrow is a fascinating astronomer. You can spell astronomer without an R sometimes. Okay. All right, so Robert Jastrow, oh, there's the R, it's under the line. Okay, that's just the, it's a miracle, yeah. That's just a scholarly way of spelling astronomer. So you know, okay, all right. All right, so now, is it under the line on yours? Yeah, okay. All right, so Robert Jastrow is a fascinating astronomer because I see him as like the scorekeeper between atheists and theists. He just seems to be open to all of the evidence, and he'll go, oh, that's a good point for the atheist, oh, that's a good point for the Christian. And he kind of just honestly keeps score. And I'm going to show you quotes from Robert Jastrow throughout the night, and you'll see how he thinks this argument unfolds. Okay, he also likened the universe to like a wound-up clock. Speaking of the law of entropy, the second law of thermodynamics, he said the universe is like a wound-up clock. But when you wind up a clock, the question is, what can be wound up without an intelligent source winding it up? So what wound up our universe that's allowing it to wind down now? Who set it in its original condition that now it's ticking its way down? Okay, so here's how I put this quote in here because it makes me go, this is how silly these arguments get sometime. So Norman Geisler, a terrific author, apologist, Ivy League professor, passed away fairly recently. He was in a debate with a materialist. And so as you can imagine, materialists only say there can be materialistic explanations for things. There is no supernatural world. There is no God. Everything has to be explained through the material world. So they're debating. And as Norman Geisler said, the second law of thermodynamics proves that there was a beginning to the universe. This Ivy League professor tried to overcome that by saying, Norman Geisler said to him, if everything's material, then what do you make of scientific theory? Because that's what this man worked in, scientific theory. He says, that's not material, that's theory. The guy's answer was, well, theory is magic. And Geisler said, what's your basis for saying that? He says, faith. I have faith that theory is magic and we can count on this magical theory, yet he won't believe in God and the evidence of God. Okay? So what you're going to see, and Robert Jastrow is going to point this out to us, is that science is its own religion. The science that's presented in public schools is faith-based. They have to have faith that things can happen that are not scientifically allowed, like the beginning of the universe, without God. Okay? All right, so here's a quote from Arthur Eddington, another cosmologist, on the importance of the second law of thermodynamics. He says, here's how important the second law is, that you stay faithful and true to following this law. So he says, the law that entropy increases, which actually means the rate of decrease of energy increases. It's decreasing faster and faster. So that law, the second law of thermodynamics, holds, I think, the supreme position among the laws of nature. If someone points out to you that your pet theory of the universe is in disagreement with Maxwell's equations, then so much for Maxwell's equations. If it's found to be contradicted by observation, well, these experiments do bungle things sometimes. But if your theory of the universe is found to be against the second law of thermodynamics, I can give you no hope. There's nothing for it but to collapse in deepest humiliation. You have to follow the second law of thermodynamics to have any credibility whatsoever. And when we follow that second law of thermodynamics, we realize the universe had a beginning and it therefore needs a cause for that beginning. Just following science. That's why I'm not reading from Genesis now. This is strictly the scientific arguments. Okay, so that's your S of surge. What does the S stand for? Right, which is also known as the law of... All right, we got through the S. Here's the U. For the universe is expanding. Thank you. The universe is expanding. So now, since we see the universe is expanding outward as time moves forward, if we go backwards in time, what would the universe be doing? Shrinking, right? So if we keep going back in time and back in time and back in time, the universe becomes a point of singularity, correct? And that's the point of singularity that exploded, correct? So now the point of singularity is an effect. The question is, what caused that singularity? Because what's contained within that singularity? All of time, space, and matter is contained in that singularity. And that explodes. And again, explosions are chaotic. But what was the result of that chaotic explosion? Order. That's the opposite of the second law, which is therefore called a miracle. Miracles need miracle workers. Wow. This might very well be the best class I've ever taught. I mean, based on you guys, not based on what I'm doing. All right. Okay, now, if you think Jastrow and Einstein and those guys are awesome because they figured out the universe is expanding, and that was around the turn of the century, from the 18th century from the 19th to the 20th century. So it's the very early 1900s that this got discovered. So that's the 1900s. I'm going to bring you back to 8 centuries before Christ. So these guys were 19 centuries after Christ. I'm going to bring you 8 centuries before Christ. That tells me this is 2,700 years before Einstein and these guys. 2,700 years before these guys. Here's what Isaiah wrote in Isaiah chapter 40, verse 20 and 21. It's not 20 and 21. It's 21 and 22. Have you not known? Have you not heard? Has it not been told you from the beginning? Where's Isaiah wants your mind when he uses the 2 words of the beginning? Genesis 1 creation account, right? Saying, hasn't it been told to you from that very beginning point? Have you not understood from the foundations of the earth? It is he who sits above the circle of the earth, and its inhabitants are like grasshoppers, who stretches out the heavens like a curtain. You hear that? It says it's God who stretches out the heavens like a curtain. A curtain, it comes from a point of singularity and stretches out from that point, doesn't it? That's pretty insightful for an 8th century BC prophet to understand the universe is expanding when it took our Einsteins in the 20th century to figure that out. Isn't that amazing? Isaiah must have had tremendous satellite technology, right? Or he must have been inspired by God. It's one of the two. All right. Okay, this guy's name is Dr. Peter Atkins. He's I was going to use a negative adjective, but I won't. He's an atheist who enjoys trying to present the other side of the coin of the creation story. Let's say that. Here's Robert, when when Arthur Eddington, this gentleman right here, when he was pressed over the second law of thermodynamics and the universe's expansion and all of these things, saying, how do you deny the need for God through all of this? Here was his answer, word for word. He said, I imagine, now is he being scientific? He's 2 words in. Is he scientific at all? Okay, I can imagine stuff too. Do I get to write books about that and people believe it? No. He starts with, I imagine a time before time when a swirling dust of mathematical points which recombine again and again and again and again and finally come by trial and error to form our space-time universe. So based on all the physics, he's saying, you know, if you get the physics wrong, you know, this universe puffs out of existence. So, you know, all these physics just combine over and over again and nothing works. And finally it hit all the right digits and boom, here's our universe, Big Bang. He says, I imagine that. Now let's logically explore the many problems with Atkins' answer here. First of all, let me politely say, who cares what you imagine? That's not helpful, okay? My granddaughter has a fantastic imagination. Nobody's asking her how the universe began, okay? Now, second thing he says, I imagine a time before time. Is that even possible? Let me bring you before time to a time. You're not allowed to have time before time, are you? There cannot be a time before time. And he says, a time before time where a swirling dust, you're supposed to tell me how something came out of nothing. And you already got dust out there, correct, to work with. And what is the swirling dust of? Mathematical points. Mathematics is the most ordered structure we know of. So if you're going to say my nothing is made up of swirling dust of mathematical points, you're not giving us creation out of nothing. You're giving us creation out of something, and that something you're giving us is very highly ordered and organized. Who did the ordering and the organizing here? It's funny, I hear you saying Jesus. You're so well trained, yeah. Okay. So how did something come out of nothing? Oh, well, the nothing consists of swirling dust of mathematical points that keep on working until they finally create a universe. Okay? That's the other side of the argument from the people at the level of doctor in the study of cosmology when they don't believe in God. Okay? All right, so 4 inherent proofs or 4 inherent problems with Atkins' theory. There's no scientific proof for it whatsoever, just something he imagined. That's a problem with a scientific suggestion is when there's no scientific proof for it, correct? Second, mathematical points are not nothing. He's supposed to tell us how it came out of nothing. Math isn't nothing, math is something. And even if it were true, mathematical points are worthless for forming life. If you're going to say there's life in this universe, so what's a mathematical equation that forms life? Because remember, in the Big Bang, nothing was alive, right? Are there things that are alive in this Big Bang universe? So how do we get from non-living to living? That requires something. It requires something. You never see life come out of non-life. So therefore, what's necessary for the cause of life? That it has even greater life. Not no life, it has to have greater life. Okay? So mathematical points are worthless for forming life, as are chemicals. Even if you just say there was existing chemicals. Nobody ever worked with chemicals in a test tube and then goes, oh my gosh, look at this alive thing that just jumped out. Okay? And then the fourth question would be, who ordered the math that you're claiming existed for all time and it's just been recombining over and over again to form the universe? How did the math get so orderly? Okay? How did that intelligence of the orderly math come out of absolutely nothing? All right. Anthony Kenny. He said this. According to the Big Bang Theory, the whole matter of the universe began to exist at a particular time in the remote past. We all agree with that now. He says a proponent of such a theory, at least if he's an atheist, must believe that the matter of the universe came from nothing and by nothing. There was absolutely nothing to work with, and there was absolutely nobody to work with it. And yet here everything is. Okay, some people like to snicker and say, in the beginning there was nothing, and then the nothing exploded into everything. It's just not feasible. All right, so that's your U of surge. Spelling bee here. What's next? R. Okay, the R stands for the radiation that has been found from the Big Bang. Okay, you can actually Google this and you'll get this colorful map of the radiation that's been found, the leftover radiation from the Big Bang. Interesting story. It was in 1965 that it was discovered by Arno Penzias and Robert Wilson. They discovered the cosmic background radiation from the Big Bang explosion. They discovered it by accident when their antenna at Bell Labs in New Jersey detected strange radiation coming from all directions. Now, if your antenna is picking up on radiation, that radiation is going to have a source. And that source should come from a certain direction, north, south, east, or west. They were getting radiations from all four directions. They couldn't figure out, why are we getting a source of radiation come from all directions? Well, it turns out they actually went up on the roof and saw bird droppings on their antenna. And so they're like, this is messing us up, and they cleaned off the bird droppings. They go back into the labs, and sure enough, they're getting radiation from all directions still. Little did they know that they discovered the radiation from the Big Bang, and they won Nobel Peace Prizes for this discovery. Okay? So Robert Jastrow, our agnostic astronomer, that's kind of keeping score for us. He said, no other explanation other than the Big Bang has been found for the fireball radiation that we found in the universe. The clincher, which has convinced almost the last doubting Thomas, is that the radiation discovered by Penzias and Wilson has exactly the pattern of wavelengths expected for the light and heat produced in a great explosion. In other words, this is from the Big Bang. Supporters of the steady state theory. What's a steady state theory say? Okay, now I'm less impressed with you. That the universe is eternal. That was the belief that the universe was eternal. So supporters of the steady state theory have desperately tried to find an alternative explanation, but they have failed. At the present time, the Big Bang theory has no competitors. Now, literally in the last week, I've been getting these news articles that they found that the Big Bang's not true. And then one of my very favorite Christian astronomers, Stephen Meyer, he wrote a counter article showing how these articles are desperate attempts to get rid of the Big Bang because the implications are so clear that it requires God, and he showed how faulty the arguments were, how they were just grasping at straws with those ideas. All right, so the G of surge, the G are the galaxy seeds, okay? Now the slide says, John, the slide says, there we go. It says great galaxy seeds, but that was just being overly enthusiastic about telling you about the galaxy seeds. The G is for galaxy, the galaxy seeds. So now, the next logical phase of the cosmic radiation background, that's CRB, the cosmic radiation background discovery, was that there should be temperature variations or ripples in this radiation. Okay, so they anticipated that they would find different heat patterns throughout this radiation because when radiation cools, it forms our galaxies. That's why they call them, this radiation background, galaxy seeds. Because when this radiation cools, it forms our stars and our galaxies and everything. So the galaxies are already formed, are already cooled radiation. So you should see parts of this radiation that are staying hot, others that are cooling and forming stars. So we should be able to see variations in this if it is indeed the radiation from the Big Bang. So they sent up a $200 million satellite called COBE The CO for COBE stands for cosmic. The B is background. The E is explorer. So this cosmic background explorer just to study this radiation. And COBE found the ripples, and scientists were amazed at their precision of these ripples. Why? Because the ripples show the explosion and expansion of the universe was precisely tweaked to cause just enough matter to congregate to allow for galaxy formation, but the expansion of the universe wasn't so fast that galaxies couldn't form because it's moving out too quickly, and it wasn't moving out too slowly that the gravity from the formed galaxies would actually pull all the matter back in and cause a great cosmic crunch. Okay? If I'm reading your faces correctly, I need to say that again. So let me do that. All right. So we have the expansion of the universe, and it's going at a certain rate, correct? Now, what COBE found, what if that rate was any slower, even 1 part in 100,000 slower, the gravity of the galaxies would actually pull all the galaxies back together again, and there'd be a great cosmic crunch. Okay? If it was 1 part in 100,000 faster, then there would be no forming of the galaxies. It would just be matter flying away, and there'd be no formation of galaxies whatsoever, which means no life. So it's got to be as precise as it is, or there never would have been life. So the ripples of COBE found are so exact, down to 1 part in 100,000, that astronomer George Smoot, who led the expedition, called these galaxy seeds the machining marks of the creation of the universe, and he called them the fingerprints of the Maker. These are God's fingerprints that we found up there. And he made a comment that made newspapers worldwide. He said, if you're religious, this is like looking at God. Okay, that's how impressive this is. There's George Smoot there. So Smoot called these ripples the seeds of the galaxies, since the pictures date back before the formation of galaxies and show us what galaxies look like before they were formed. And the E of surge is Einstein's theory of general relativity. Einstein's theory of general relativity has been proven and verified up to 5 decimal places. His theory demands a beginning for all time, space, and matter, and demonstrates that time, space, and matter are correlative. In other words, you can't have 2 of the 3 or 1 of the 3. If you have any of them, you have to have them all. Time, space, and matter are correlative. They have to come into existence at the same time. So that gives you the acronym SURGE. Second law of thermodynamics. The fact that the universe is expanding. The fact that we found the radiation from the Big Bang means there was a Big Bang, and that's our beginning. The G, the galaxy seeds. We see how these different temperature variations of the background, as they cool, they form our galaxies. So impressive to astronomers, they've called it the fingerprints of the Maker. So if you add the E of Einstein to the second law of the universe expanding, the radiation background, the galaxy seeds, with Einstein's theory, you have powerful, what kind of proof? Scientific. We're not going verse by verse showing, see what God did, see what God did. We're actually digging into the scientist world and saying, see what God did? And there's no other explanation. So Robert Jastrow said this, now we see how the astronomical evidence leads to a biblical view of the origin of the world. Pretty good for an agnostic astronomer, right? And he said this, astronomers now find that they painted themselves into a corner because they have proven by their own methods that the world began abruptly in an act of creation to which you can trace the seeds of every star, every planet, every living thing in the cosmos and on the earth. And they found that all this happened as a product of forces they cannot hope to discover. In other words, keep looking in the science world. You can't find how it all happened. Law of cause and effect. What's causing this? God is the necessary cause. That there are what I or anyone would call supernatural forces at work is now, I think, scientifically proven fact. That there has to be something supernatural. It's beyond the natural world to explain this stuff. There has to be a supernatural. He says we proved scientifically. And who did it? The atheist astronomers. By their own methods. Their own science, they proved this. Arthur Eddington, he's the one that last week he said that he finds the thought of the universe having a beginning was repugnant to him. He said, I'd like to find a genuine loophole in this. Now he says this: the beginning seems to present insuperable difficulties unless we agree to look upon it as frankly supernatural. You just can't explain it unless you get into the supernatural explanations of the universe. Arno Penzias, one of the Bell Lab technicians in New Jersey that discovered what? The radiation background, right? He said the steady state theory, which is what theory? Eternal universe. I got to say, this side of the room smarter than this side of the room. Okay? The steady state theory turned out to be so ugly that people dismissed it. The easiest way to fit the observations with the least number of parameters was one in which the universe was created out of nothing in an instant and continues to expand. Robert Wilson, his partner, said this: I philosophically liked the steady state theory, and I clearly had to give it up. I liked it, but I had to give it up. Fred Hereen, a science writer, said, certainly there was something that set it all off. Certainly, if you're religious, I can't think of a better theory of the origin of the universe to match with Genesis. Okay, these are not theologians talking to you now. This is the science world. George Smoot, there is no doubt that a parallel exists between the Big Bang as an event and the Christian notion of creation from nothing. How many doubts are there about it in the science world? None. There's no doubt. Robert Jastrow again. This is a very important statement that he makes here. Okay, this is what I try to gear our kids at CCA towards being ready in college. Theologians are generally delighted with the proof that the universe had a beginning, but astronomers are curiously upset. Their reactions provide an interesting demonstration of the response of the scientific mind, which is supposedly a very objective mind, but when evidence uncovered by science itself leads to a conflict with the articles of faith in our profession. Here's a scientist saying, we have articles of faith. We believe things without any evidence or proof. We go based on faith. And theologians, when they make these discoveries, they're delighted. But why do his question is this: why do scientists get emotional about results that they find? They should be totally unemotional. All they're trying to do is try to find truth and fact. And when they find truth and fact, they should celebrate that. But if it's in conflict to their religious understandings, they get upset. And Robert Jastrow says that's very curious. It's not in their profession to be emotional about this. They shouldn't be rooting for an answer. They should just be seeing how this stuff works and why. So he says it turns out that scientists behave the way the rest of us do when our beliefs are in conflict with the evidence. We become irritated. We pretend the conflict doesn't exist, or we paper it over with meaningless phrases. Because he says the fact that they call it a Big Bang, he says that's a meaningless phrase. They should be saying there's a supernatural cause for this thing. But when they call it Big Bang, it just sounds like a big firecracker went off and nobody asks who lit the firecracker, right? So they give it phrases like that. He says, so this is curiously emotional language for a discussion on mathematical formulas. Can you imagine people talking math and they're getting upset? 2 + 2 is what? Give me a break. That's ridiculous, right? He says, I suppose that the idea of a beginning in time annoyed Einstein because of its theological implications. He was bothered when he found about the conclusions of his general theory of relativity. So he says there's a kind of religion in science. Every effect must have its cause, but there is no first cause. This religious faith of the scientists is violated by the discovery that the world had a beginning under conditions in which the known laws of physics are not valid. Remember I said it violates the second law of thermodynamics, right? It's a miracle. And as a product of forces or circumstances we cannot discover. Why can't they discover the cause of the universe? Because they're not looking here. It's really that simple. When that happens, the scientist has lost control, and if he really examined the implications, he would be traumatized. As usual, when faced with trauma, the mind reacts by ignoring the implications. In science, this is known as refusing to speculate. So what do you think caused all this? I refuse to speculate on what could be the cause of this. Okay? Or trivializing the origin of the world by calling it a Big Bang as if the universe were a firecracker. Okay, so they make these discoveries and they're not going to say, hey, this looks like the Genesis explosion. So they call it a Big Bang, because that threw me for years. I was scared to death of what the Big Bang meant for my belief in Genesis. For years I was scared of that. Probably a couple decades. I didn't want to know what the implications of the Big Bang were. And I was thrilled when I finally checked it out. Okay? The evidence shows clearly that time, space, and matter all had a beginning. This demands a cause for it. The cause must be something or someone outside of time, outside of space, and not made of matter. Has to be an eternal cause. Listen, it has to be. You violate science if you say anything else. It has to be true of these causes. Okay, that's the cosmological argument. Everything that had a beginning had a cause. Okay, we prove that through the law of causality. The universe had a beginning. We prove that through surge. Therefore, the conclusion matches that the universe had a cause. So now it becomes, what is that cause? Here's what's necessary scientifically of that cause. Has to have intelligence because the effect has intelligence. Has to have life because the effect has life. Has to have personhood because the effects have personhood. Can't get personhood out of non-personhood. Okay? Has to be outside of time, eternal, not made of matter, and not limited by space. Moses is so lucky because that's how he described God thousands of years ago. Happens to fit all the science. Doesn't it? Okay. All right, I think we have time to go into the teleological argument. You doing all right? Smoke coming out of your ears? You all right? Okay. Teleological argument. This is called the argument from design. If miracles need miracle workers, design needs designers, correct? If we see design, it says there's got to be a designer. Okay? Sometimes you can spell argument like that. Not all the time. You're wearing a collar, so that's okay. All right. Okay. Actually, John and I went back and corrected all this. I don't know how it came up, not corrected. We have so many versions of this because John made it all very pretty. Has anybody taken this class from me before? Do you remember how ugly those slides were? Diana, you did, yeah. It was just me typing on a blank screen. All you had was words on just a blank screen. And John looked at it and he goes, are you out of your mind? He goes, I've been taking this class for how many years and I can't look at it anymore. So he took it and he put all these beautiful pictures to it. Isn't it great? Yeah, all these beautiful pictures. Okay? Now he just needs a dictionary. Yeah. All right. Okay. You can tell John and I have a lot of fun behind the scenes, can't you? Yeah, we have a lot of fun. And you'd still be looking at those blank screens if it weren't for John. On his own initiative, he changed everything and made it so much better. Yeah, yeah. And I pay him the same as I pay you guys. Same as I charge you guys too, right? Okay. All right. So now teleological argument. Now you say, oh, look at that. There's two premises, and if those two premises can be proven, then that conclusion will naturally follow. Correct? So premise one, every design has a designer. Premise two, the universe has highly complex design. Therefore, the universe had a designer. So what do we have to do now? Prove the first two premises. Right. We got to prove premise one and premise two, right? So does every design have a designer? Well, Sir Isaac Newton, he's pretty smart, right? He acknowledged the need for a designer of the universe. He said, this most beautiful system of the sun, planets, and comets could only proceed from the counsel and dominion of an intelligent and powerful being. Okay, Sir Isaac Newton could only come from the counsel and dominion of an intelligent and powerful being. Isaiah 45, 18 and 19 says this, for thus says the Lord, who created the heavens, who is God, who formed the earth and made it, who has established it, who did not create it in vain. Listen to this part. Who formed it to be inhabited. I love that about Isaiah 45. God says, I formed the earth for a purpose, and the purpose was habitation. Now look at Mars. Does it look like it was expecting anybody? Saturn, Jupiter, Venus, Mercury. Okay, it doesn't look like it was expecting anybody, right? But our earth looked like it was expecting visitors, didn't it? Okay, let's get apples for them and carrots and potatoes. All right, let's miraculously, out of dirt. Isn't that showing off? To me, that's showing off. I'm going to feed you. There's nothing here. God, it's going to come out of the dirt. Okay, it's like, that's going to have the necessary minerals to grow food that gives me necessary nutrients? Yeah. Okay? Do you understand what a miracle that is? Okay? And it's going to have the right texture so that you can actually, and I'm going to create teeth in you so it perfectly goes through that texture, and you're going to chew it up. And just so you can enjoy it a little, I'm going to throw these things called taste buds on your tongue so you can actually go, wow, this is actually fun. You go, yeah, but I'm going to forbid gluttony. So watch how much fun you're having with it, right? Because I want you to be healthy, okay? And doesn't fruit, I mean, maybe this is just me, but I look at fruit and all the colors and how juicy it can be. And to me, that's candy. God's saying, this is your candy. It's colorful, it's flavorful, it's nutritious, it's all that. And then we come and we go, no, this is candy. And now we got cavities and diabetes and all these things. We can't do it like God, can we? All right. All right. William Paley, he said this. He says, if you're walking in the woods and you find a diamond-studded Rolex watch, or I don't think he said Rolex in 1800s, but anyway. He says, what do you suppose caused the watch? The wind and the rain? Erosion? Some combination of natural forces? Of course not. You would know that there was intelligence behind the cause of that watch, right? Okay. I usually quote him, but I don't say in a forest, I say Mars. You're walking across Mars, you find a watch. Are you going to go, look what the wind and the rain and the erosion did up here? You would say a watch is far too complex to have any other explanation except for intelligence. But yet you take the creator of watches and you say, well, they were formed by accident. That was just pure accident. But the watch requires intelligence. Okay, Norman Geisler, I like how he points it out. He will say, and I think I brought this up last week, if you see the words drink Coke in the sky, nobody would say what a fascinating cloud formation that is. Because it's far too complex to credit to just cloud formation. You will know that's a skywriter who had intelligence behind him. And if drink Coke is too complex of information to credit to chance, then how dare you say that human life came by accident, by blind forces? Okay? It's insulting to be asked to believe it, quite frankly. Okay. Mount Rushmore. Go to Mount Rushmore. Can you imagine the conversations? Look what the wind and the erosion did over millions of years. What a fascinating formation that made in the rocks. Clearly, that was designed by intelligence. Okay, so we're going to talk about the anthropic principle here. Anthropic principle. So this speaks of the highly precise and interdependent environmental conditions that make up the universe. This universe and this earth are made with constants that are so finely tuned and precise, and if they move even a hair's breadth off of their precision, there's no life whatsoever. So what I tell my students is this, because they have lockers, right? And the lockers have dials. And those dials have 50 different notches, so they can have anywhere from 0 to 49 as a choice of their number, and they get 3 numbers. Okay, so it makes it extremely unlikely anybody just randomly picks numbers from 0 to 49 3 times in a row accurately, right? And gets their locker open. We're so sure it'll never happen that we'll have those lockers there till Jesus comes back, and nobody's ever going to break into a locker. We're pretty confident of that. Okay? But now the anthropic principle says this. It's like having over 100 lockers, but the dials don't have 50 notches. Many of them have billions, some of them trillions of notches on each locker. Okay? And now you've got to find the first number. It could be 1 to 1 trillion. And then if you happen to get that trillion to 1 odds right, then you got to go to a second one and get it right. And you got over 100 of them you got right. All of those got to be right, or there's no life in this universe. That's what's happened. So, anthropic constant number 1. It's not like this is called anthropic constant 1. It's just one out of many that I picked just to show you. Oxygen levels. Oxygen makes up 21% of our atmosphere. If we were slightly higher, there'd be spontaneous fires that would destroy the planet. Slightly lower, we'd all suffocate. It has to be what it is, or there's no life. And we're the only oxygen-dense atmosphere known in the universe. Doesn't happen anywhere else. Why? I formed the earth to be inhabited. Atmospheric transparency. If our atmosphere were less transparent, not enough solar radiation would reach our surface. If it were more transparent, there'd be far too much. If it were more transparent, there'd be far too much radiation to be able to survive. I think that's supposed to say less transparent there. No, more transparent. Okay. Has to be what it is. Okay. This point, number 3, is such a beautiful picture. I hate to go to point 4 on it. Isn't that great? All right. Aren't we fortunate we get looks like that on our beach all the time? So the moon to Earth gravitational interaction. If the interaction between the moon's gravity and the Earth's were greater, tidal effects on the oceans and atmosphere and rotational period would be too severe. For less, orbital changes would cause climatic instabilities. The distance of the moon, the gravitational pull of the moon, the interaction with our tides has to be what it is, or there'd be no life. Carbon dioxide levels, number 4. If carbon dioxide were any greater, there'd be a runaway greenhouse effect that would occur and we'd all burn up. If it were lower, plants would not be able to maintain efficient photosynthesis and we would all suffocate. Carbon dioxide has to be what it is or there's no life. Other constants, centrifugal force of planetary movements precisely balance the orbits around the sun. If the universe expanded 1/1,000,000th more slowly, the universe would have collapsed in on itself. Any faster and galaxies never would have formed. 1 part in 1,000,000. There's 1,000,000 other possibilities and only one works. We got the one that works on top of the moon's gravitational force and everything else that we're talking about. If the Earth's crust were greater, too much oxygen would be absorbed by it. Any thinner and volcanic activity would prohibit life. If the rotation of the Earth were slower, temperatures between night and day would be too extreme for life. Faster and atmospheric wind velocities would be too great. Dr. Hugh Ross took the 122 constants, and they still find more, but when they had 122 constants, he took those odds, he calculated the odds that would allow for life on Earth existing on any planet. So he didn't just say, the Earth's the only possible planet for existence. He said, what if it happened on any planet? And when I say any planet, he estimates that there's 1 times 10 to the 22nd planets that we've seen. That's a 1 with 22 zeros after it. That's how many planets we're talking about. What's the odds of any one of them having life? He said, he calculated the odds to be 1 times 10 to the 138th power. That's the number on the screen. Yes, I typed in 138 zeros for you there. Okay? Listen, if it were 1 chance in 10, then most likely it never would have happened. 1 chance in 100 to be 10 times less likely to happen. This is 1 times 10 to the 138th power. Okay? It's estimated the number of molecules in our universe is half that number. Molecules in the universe is estimated to be half of that number. Okay? What can an atheist say? We're lucky. We're just lucky. Somebody estimated that if you won the lottery every day from the day you were born until your 18th birthday, now you're in the ballpark of these odds. Every day winning the lottery from birth to 18. Arno Penzias, he says, astronomy leads us to a unique event, a universe which was created out of nothing and delicately balanced to provide exactly the conditions required to support life. Ed Harrison, cosmologist, said, here is the cosmological proof of the existence of God, the design argument of Paley, updated and refurbished. When he says the design argument of Paley, that's the watch example, right? That was his design argument. If you see a watch, it had to have a designer. Well, here's that brought to the cosmological level. Okay? Fred Hoyle, another astronomer, he says a common sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with the physics. as well as chemistry and biology, and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. Why do you think he uses the term blind forces? It's the entire theory of evolution. It's all by blind forces. Okay? There are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. All right, so that's how we'll conclude tonight, right on time.